In an earlier assignment in class, we wrote equations for the sequences that we matched with the graphs and taped into our textbooks. There is an answer key on Canvas for that assignment. So for number 1 here, it says to go back to the graphic organizers from previous lesson and write the recursive and explicit formula. Look on Canvas, and there is find the answer key that gives the solutions for this question. There is an assignment that has all of the recursive and explicit formulas written down. All right, so then let's look at the advantages and disadvantages of using a recursive formula. So the advantages are the pluses, and the disadvantages are the minuses. So when you think about advantages and disadvantages, these are the pluses and the minuses. You'll sometimes also hear pros and cons. So what are some of the pros and cons of using a recursive formula? And remember, the recursive formula is the one that you have to say what to do to the term that came before. So when I think about this, for me, an advantage is that once I know the pattern, it's easy for me to figure out the next term. So, for example, if the pattern says multiply by 2, I can just do that, right? If I know the term that came before. If I know the term that came before. All right, so that's an advantage, right? That's a plus. That's a pro, or a plus of using the recursive formula. A disadvantage is that if I'm looking for a term in the far distant future, that would take a lot of steps. Okay, so for example, imagine how long it would take to find the 1000th term, because you'd have to go through this process 1,000 times. So that is a big disadvantage of the recursive formula. But now let's look at the explicit formula and identify some pros and cons, some pluses and minuses, some advantages and disadvantages. So when I look at it from my perspective, if I am wanting to use an explicit formula, there are some pros and cons of doing that as well. So let's take a look at the pros and cons of using an explicit formula. So an advantage of an explicit formula is that once the formula is written, you can use it to find any term at all. So once the formula is written, you can use it to find any term, right? So you can use it to find the third term, the 10th term, the 1,000,000th term. You can use it to find any term. When I think about explicit formula, the only disadvantage I can think of is that sometimes it's maybe confusing or an extra step to write the formula or to figure out the formula. Okay, so that can be a disadvantage, is the formula helps you find any term you want, but you have to know how to write the formula, which can be a downside.